thrust will go here, through the Ardennes.
Very well.
Excellent. Engine won't catch. Hold the column back. Want the ice up ahead.
Through the blinding snow of the Ardennes, Adam's forces advanced, pressing southeast towards the Bulge.
Charges detonated on the northern bridge. At 100, 150.
January 1st, 1945. 0400 hours. The last year of the war has begun, but the killing has not slowed, and the world's eyes are fixed on the Ardennes. Snow clouds hang low over Western Europe, as if the continent itself is exhausted and waiting for the final blow. Over frozen hedgerows and shell-scarred villages, General George S. Patton's Third Army is hammering the southern flank of Hitler's great winter gamble. The German salient is shrinking by the hour. Allied intelligence officers are congratulating themselves, convinced that Berlin has played its last card. The Wehrmacht, they say, has spent its fuel, its armor, its best troops. The miracle weapons are not coming. The war, they whisper, is nearly over. But 100 miles to the south, far from the headlines and far from the complacent cheers of Allied staff rooms, the story is different. In the frozen silence of the northern Vosges Mountains, where dense pine forests swallow sound and narrow roads slither across snow-packed ridges, something the Allies have not anticipated is taking shape. Inside a chilly command post lit only by lanterns and stoves, General Johannes Blaskowitz, commander of German Army Group G, is signing attack orders. His operations officers and adjutants move briskly, distributing sealed packets to couriers who mount motorcycles fitted with snow chains. Outside, men are stamping their boots, engines are being warmed, and crates of artillery rounds are being lifted toward camouflaged howitzers. To the Allies, Army Group G should not be capable of offensive operations. It should barely be capable of holding static defensive positions. But Blaskowitz has received reinforcements, fragments scraped together from the collapsing Third Reich units pulled from reserve training battalions, divisions thrown together from convalescents and veterans, and most dangerously of all armored formations, equipped with late-model Panthers and Panzer Rifles that no one in Allied headquarters believes exist in this sector. Under his command stands the 13 SS Corps, elements of the 21st Panzer Division brought in from Germany with fresh vehicles, and the elite 6th SS Mountain Division, hardened by years of Alpine and partisan combat in the Balkans and the Soviet Union. There are Volksgrenadiers, Luftwaffe field troops, fortress units, engineers, signals detachments, all lashed together into what Berlin insists will be a battle group, capable of restoring initiative to the Western Front. His orders from Hitler are written in the blunt language of a dictator who refuses to accept reality. The operation is called Nordwind. The objective is simple to write, impossible to execute. Crack the overextended lines of the U.S. 7th Army, roll back the American flank, cross the Rhine near Strasbourg, demonstrate that the Wehrmacht still possesses operational teeth, and force the Allies to divert armored reserves south, relieving pressure on the Ardennes offensive and resetting the strategic board. On paper, it is a masterpiece of opportunistic calculation. In practice, it is lunacy balanced on the edge of a map. Blaskowitz is no fanatic. He is a professional soldier of the old Prussian school, trained in the meticulous calculus of operational art. He was schooled in the doctrines of Schlieffen and Moltke, not the hysterical fantasies of Hitler. He knows war is logistics, geometry, weather, fuel, and terrain. He has seen enough winters, enough mountains, enough failed operations to recognize the fault lines beneath operational optimism. He studies the operational map with a calm intensity. Towns like Bischofingen-sur-Moder, Hatten, Rittershofen, Gamsheim, Hagenau, all places that will soon burn. But for now, sit quietly beneath the snow, unaware that history is about to pass over them like a scythe. Then he walks to the window. Outside, the Vosges loom like a jagged wall carved from shadow and frost. Narrow roads snake along ridgelines and plunge into ravines carved by centuries of meltwater. The forests are ancient, thick with pine and fir. The gradients are brutal. The wind can freeze exposed skin in minutes. Blaskowitz sees all this, and he understands something that the men in Berlin do not. The terrain is not merely inhospitable, it is actively hostile to mechanized warfare. It does not care about the Panther tank's formidable 75mm K-42 cannon or the thickness of its glacis armor. It does not care about shock, penetration, spearheads, or the mystical German doctrine of the Schwerpunkt. He returns to his desk and writes memoranda to OKW. His warnings are clinical, precise, devoid of emotion. The mountains will neutralize our armored advantage. The roads are unsuitable for mass tank operations. The terrain prevents rapid exploitation. Cancellation is recommended. These are the words of a man who knows he is throwing stones at a tsunami. Hours later, a reply arrives. It is short, it is cold, and it contains no room for professional debate. The Führer has decided. Army Group G will attack. Any commander who hesitates will be relieved. And so the artillery is registered. The infantry is briefed. The radio nets are tested. The engineers cut firing lanes through the trees. The Panthers are fueled with precious synthetic gasoline produced at refineries, bombed so often that fuel is now measured in miracles. At 2300 hours on December 31st, as Europe drifts into a new and terrible year, German artillery opens fire across the entire sector. By 23:30, Operation Nordwind is underway. In the valleys and forests of Alsace, the last German offensive on the Western Front has begun. The first 48 hours unfold like a nightmare for the Americans. The 45th and 79th Infantry Divisions are hammered by waves of grenadiers, engineers, and light infantry. The 44th Infantry Division fights desperately to hold mountain passes, while companies scattered along 30-kilometer frontages send frantic reports that they are being bypassed, cut off, encircled. The 7th Army is stretched thin. Every armored battalion and most heavy infantry assets have been stripped away and sent north to reinforce the Ardennes. Some American companies defend frontages 3 to 4 miles wide, triple what doctrine permits. They are not lines so much as skeletal nodes of resistance, connected by radio, but separated by forests that swallow sound and light. In the chaos of these first days, Hitler appears vindicated. The German infantry smashes through outposts, infiltrates through forests, and outmaneuvers inexperienced U.S. units. To a staff officer watching a wall chart, red arrows surge forward just as they had in 1940. Speed, aggression, audacity. The ghost of Blitzkrieg stalks the map. But the reality behind those arrows is nothing like 1940. There are no paved strategic highways, no rolling plains, no open maneuver corridors. What lies before the German armored spearhead is geography carved specifically to kill momentum. The elite spearhead is the 21st Panzer Division, supported by SS Mountain Troops and Volksgrenadiers. Its Panthers are magnificent machines on paper. Their frontal armor is nearly immune to the 75mm guns of American Shermans at normal combat ranges. Their optics are superior. Their long 75mm cannons can destroy a Sherman at 2,000 meters, while the Sherman must close to 500 or less to have any chance. A Panther in open terrain dictates the terms of engagement. But the mountains do not care about specifications. The roads of the northern Vosges were built centuries ago for farm carts, timber wagons, and occasional cavalry. Their maximum width is just over 3 meters, almost exactly the width of a Panther tank. There is no margin for error. If the lead vehicle slips, stalls, or is hit by a mine, the entire column locks up like an artery clogged with iron. There are no shoulders, no bypasses, no alternative routes. Behind each stalled tank, more tanks idle, burning fuel that Germany no longer possesses in abundance, fuel that Hitler is gambling on capturing from American depots near the Rhine. By January 4th, the illusion of velocity evaporates. The German columns are no longer advancing. They are crawling. What should have been a measured advance becomes a mechanical pilgrimage through hell. 20 kilometers per day becomes 10. 10 becomes 5. 5 becomes 2. 2 becomes 0. A panther in column formation ceases to be a predator and becomes a steel traffic jam. When recovery teams attempt to winch disabled tanks off roads slick with ice, bulldozers and half-tracks skid and crash. Tracks snap. Transmissions overheat. Men freeze as they wait for orders that never come. The spearhead has not yet reached a single major American defensive line, yet fuel gauges are already dropping below operational minimums. Blaskowitz reads the reports with grim detachment. He knew this would happen, though knowing offers no comfort. His infantry is advancing, yes, but too slowly. Breakthrough in the Ardennes was predicated on shock, the rapid collapse of an enemy's decision-making cycle. Nordwind, by contrast, is a drowning man clawing for shore while wearing 50 pounds of iron. Opposing him is Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, commander of the U.S. 7th Army. Patch is no Patton. He is quiet, methodical, not beloved by journalists or headline writers. But he has one quality that matters more than ego: clarity. Patch knows he cannot hold the entire line. He knows his divisions are overextended. He knows his flanks are hanging in the air. So he makes a decision that is cold, professional, and militarily elegant. He trades space for time. He orders staged withdrawals to the Maginot Line fortifications and to prepared river positions. He funnels the German assault deeper into the mountains, into narrower corridors, closer to fixed defenses. He does not need to stop the Germans. He only needs to slow them until terrain, artillery, and logistics strangle the offensive for him. This is where Operation Nordwind turns from audacity into tragedy. The Panthers reach medieval villages whose streets were designed for horses and foot traffic, not 45-ton machines with 4-meter gun barrels. In places like Wingen-sur-Moder, Rittershofen, and Hatton, Panther crews are forced to navigate streets so narrow that their barrels scrape stone walls. Snow and ice turn the cobblestones into skating rinks. The turret traverse slows as engines choke and sputter. Infantry clings to the sides of tanks for warmth and protection, but those same tanks become targets for bazooka teams hiding in doorways, crawl spaces, cellars, and behind collapsed masonry. American bazooka teams at 30 meters are far more lethal than Sherman's at 1,000. Urban geometry becomes the great equalizer. A tank cannot angle its armor in an alleyway. It cannot bring its gun to bear around a 90-degree corner. A shaped charge does not care about frontal armor. It seeks the thin plates at the rear or the vents atop the engine deck. Panthers that on open ground are tyrants become coffins in villages that predate gunpowder. German infantry radios crackle with calm voices reporting, "Panther knocked out. Request recovery. Street impassable." Recovery vehicles cannot enter without becoming targets themselves. Fuel trucks refuse to move forward because to do so is suicide. While tanks die in towns, artillery becomes the new king. The Germans possess formidable guns, but their ammunition is rationed. Every shell fired is a calculation. Every Nebelwerfer rocket a question mark. The American 7th Army has no such limitations. Patch has inherited an industrial machine that measures ammunition consumption in boxcars, not crates. U.S. forward observers perched on high ground or inside old Maginot turrets call fire missions with clinical efficiency. Corps-level 155mm guns and 8-inch howitzers respond with terrifying volume. The Vosges turn valleys into acoustic amplifiers. Shells detonate in treetops, sending splinters of wood scything downward like secondary shrapnel. The Germans call it Baumschlag, tree bursts. There is no defense against it. Helmets are useless. Trenches offer no cover when shrapnel falls from above. The battles of Hatton and Rittershofen become legends of mechanized attrition. For 12 days, Panthers duel with Shermans across open fields. On paper, the Panther dominates. In practice, the Panthers are tethered to artillery scarcity and fuel starvation, while Shermans are supported by an ecosystem, tank destroyers, self-propelled guns, air observers, supply trains, engineer battalions, and above all, massed artillery that never stops firing. When German commanders achieve a localized breakthrough, their infantry rush forward only to discover that their armor is stuck behind trees, wrecks, or fuel shortages. When American tanks are knocked out, replacements arrive within hours. When German tanks are knocked out, they are gone forever. By mid-January, the offensive has lost momentum. Not courage, the German infantry remains aggressive, determined, and tactically competent. What they lack is operational viability. They are burning fuel at triple projected consumption. A Panther running in cold weather, climbing grades and idling in traffic jams consumes 7 to 8 liters of fuel per kilometer. The delays alone burn fuel at 5 liters per hour just to keep engines from freezing. Hitler's gamble depended on Panthers reaching American fuel dumps intact. Instead, Panthers sit frozen in forests with full ammunition racks and empty fuel tanks. Crews shiver inside their steel coffins, listening to the distant rumble of American guns. Fuel is not the only crisis. Air power, whenever the sky clears, becomes the American answer to concentrated armor. P-47, Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings scream down the valleys, strafing columns that have nowhere to disperse. German machine gunners fire at them out of instinct rather than hope. The Luftwaffe cannot contest the skies. It exists now only as isolated survivors rather than an air force. The skies belong to the industrial world across the Atlantic. On January 20th, radio messages reach Blaskowitz that his offensive cannot continue. Not because his troops refuse, not because his officers lack skill, not because his tanks are obsolete, but because war has moved beyond the realm of willpower and into the realm of mathematics. The fuel is gone. The repair parts are gone. The reserves do not exist. The Panzer Grenadiers have fought for every village, every crossroads, every frozen ditch, but the cost is measured in divisions that no longer exist on the map. On January 25, 1945, Hitler authorizes the halt order. Operation Nordwind is over. The Germans have lost roughly 22,000 men. General Johannes Blaskowitz was right from the first sentence of his memorandum. The mountains did not care about the Panthers' superiority. They did not care about Prussian tactical finesse or SS fanaticism. They cared only about geometry and physics. And in January 1945, terrain and logistics defeated the last German offensive in the West. Historians often ask whether Germany could have changed the outcome of the war with more tanks, more training, more fanaticism, more courage. The answer lies buried in those frozen valleys. Germany did not lose Operation Nordwind because its soldiers lacked bravery, or because its officers lacked skill, or because its tanks were inferior. They lost because war in 1945 was no longer an affair of cavalry charges and daring raids. It was an equation. Logistics multiplied by geography equals outcome. Industrial capacity divided by distance equals reality. The United States did not need a better tank than the Panther. It needed a reliable supply chain, working roads, functioning railroads, endless artillery ammunition, proximity fuses for airburst shells, forward observers with radios, engineers who could clear paths, fuel trucks that never ran dry, and factories thousands of miles away turning out shells and vehicles faster than the Germans could destroy them. Panthers could not defeat proximity fuses. Panzers could not defeat locomotives in Illinois or refineries in Texas. No amount of tactical brilliance can overcome a strategic system operating at continental scale. At the end of Nordwind, the Germans had proven one last thing: that courage without a system is a spent match. That technical superiority inside a tactical bubble means nothing when surrounded by an adversary whose strength lies not in one weapon, but in the interlocking network of industry, logistics, communications, and doctrine. Blaskowitz did not celebrate the end. He did not rant about betrayal. He simply filed reports, noted casualties, and prepared for the inevitable retreat that would follow. He was a dying empire's last professional commander, watching the industrial age crush the romantic age of warfare. When historians visited the battlefields decades later, they found Panthers still rusting where they had run out of fuel. Turrets frozen in place, tracks seized, armor intact, ammunition untouched. Perfect predators in every respect, except for the one that mattered most. They could not move. The men who fought in the Vosges, on both sides, remembered the mountains not as scenery, but as an adversary. U.S. infantrymen recalled hearing German tanks growl helplessly somewhere in the trees, engines revving, treads chewing at ice, transmissions grinding, predators trapped in cages too small to pace. German grenadiers remembered being shelled for hours by artillery they never saw, never heard loading, never had the chance to silence. Engineers on both sides remembered pulling bodies from wrecks frozen solid in winter poses, hands still grasping controls, eyes still open, snow falling through shell holes in the turret roof. In the decades after the war, military academies studied Operation Nordwind not for its daring, but for its revelation. They taught future officers why terrain is not an obstacle but a domain, why logistics is not support but destiny, why industrial systems win wars and tactical excellence merely buys time. And perhaps most importantly, why a nation cannot build weapons in isolation from the systems that allow those weapons to function. Germany built Panthers without fuel, Tigers without spare parts, Luftwaffe squadrons without pilots, fortresses without radar, rockets without targeting systems, submarines without air cover, and offensives without strategic depth. The United States built factories. It built railroads, pipelines, convoys, depots, port facilities, training centers, transport aircraft, replacement pools, and code-breaking facilities. It built not only tanks, but the systems that make tanks matter. Nations do not win wars with heroism. They win wars with systems. Operation Nordwind was the last moment when the Third Reich attempted to shape the war on the Western Front through decisive battle. It failed not because the idea was inherently flawed, but because the nation executing it no longer inhabited the industrial and logistical reality of modern warfare. The German Army of 1940 could conquer nations in 6 weeks. The German Army of 1945 could barely conquer a village in 6 days. Not because its men had grown less brave, but because the world around them had changed. In the end, the mountains had been waiting. They had been there before Hitler, before Napoleon, before Louis XIV. They had watched Roman legions march across Europe, and they would watch tourists decades later, unaware that beneath their feet lay rusting fragments of a war born from ideology but ended by mathematics. In those forests and valleys, the myth of the invincible Panzer died not in flames, but in silence. Engines cold, fuel gone, crews walking away. And so Operation Nordwind passed into history, not as another miracle, not as another triumph, but as the quiet epilogue to a story that had already been written in factories, in rail yards, in oil fields, in assembly lines, and in the minds of engineers who understood that war was no longer decided by the sharpness of a sword or the courage of a cavalry charge, but by the cold and unromantic arithmetic of industrial systems. General Blaskowitz had warned them. The mountains did not care, and in January 1945 the mountains won.